All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Sean McVeigh. I'm the National Training Coordinator at the National Soil Survey Center in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I want to welcome you to our National Soil Survey Center monthly webinar. And today's webinar is on combining precision conservation technologies into a flexible framework to facilitate agricultural watershed planning. Today's webinar is recorded, and I'm going to ask that everyone please use your mute button unless you are presenting. So I can hear a conversation in the background. If you would take a moment to use the mute button on your phone, and if your phone doesn't have a mute button, you can use *6 to mute and unmute your phone. So please, everyone, take a moment to check your mute status. And at the end, you can unmute your phone and take some questions live that way. I'd also invite people to use their Q&A tab at the top of the live meeting frame to submit a question in writing as the presentation goes along. And again, please check your mute status, because the phone system does pick up every cough and email typing and every other noise you can think of in the background, every conversation. And we don't want to have that compete with our speakers today. We do have multiple speakers for this presentation from the ARS, and I'm going to turn that over to that group to begin our webinar. So, Mark, do you want to take the lead?
Yeah. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks everyone for logging in. My name is Mark Comer. I'm a research soil scientist at the National Laboratory for Agriculture and Environment in Ames, Iowa. I'm also the lead scientist for our water quality project here. We have several activities under that project. One of them being assessment of conservation practices for water quality improvement, and another being development of watershed planning tools, and that's the topic that we're going to be delving into today. We've been able to make some good progress over the last couple of years in this area, in large part due to a conservation innovation grant through NRCS that we've been able to get some funding from. And also it's due in large part to the efforts of a couple of my colleagues here. David James is our GIS specialist. He's got a keen interest in data management and database development. And those of you who are familiar with our Stewart's website as part of the Conservation Effects Assessment Project would know some of his work. Also, Sarah Porter is here. She's also a GIS person who's come to us from the University of Iowa. She did some nice work there with remote sensing and land use classification, and she's done a good job applying that training to our project. And you'll see quite a bit of the fruits of her efforts here in just a little bit. So I'm going to go right into the content here. So we hear a lot today about big data and and using big databases and such. And I think a lot of that kind of boils down to how do we develop and use new data sources to help us address pressing problems that maybe we haven't been able to tackle very well in the past. And I think this is kind of a case study in that, developing data and then applying some new thinking in terms of the area of conservation planning. And so we're going to spend a little time talking about the data that we've developed, and then how we apply that through a framework to develop these conservation planning tools, and give you kind of a case study of the Whitewater River in the karst area of southeast Minnesota. And we've trialed this in several states, including Indiana. We've got a collaborator with NRCS. We'll introduce at the end, who is planning to make a few comments on this project at the end. And so I hope people will have some time for questions and answers. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to David James, and he's going to discuss some of the Thanks, Mark. First of all, I'd like to say thanks to NRCS for giving us the opportunity to talk to you all today. I especially want to thank Sharon Wolfman from NRCS Soil Survey Center, a longtime colleague of mine who I have enjoyed pursuing soil geography issues with over the years, and she is one instrumental in helping us get connected with the today. When Mark came about 3 years ago, we knew that we were going to have some opportunities to pursue some conservation planning work. Our thoughts were essentially that what we really wanted to do is be able to develop planning tools and accompanying data structure that would allow us to start to look at the landscape in high detail. Essentially being able to bring our efforts to the field scale and be able to address the issues at that level. So over about a year or so, we employed a number of students that helped us develop some of the base data for this, and then myself and Sarah also worked to assemble this data. It's an extensive data set, and it's also a very intensive data set. It crosses 3 states and part of Indiana, 130 Huck 8, over 4,000 Huck 12 watersheds are involved in the data structure. And it's the Huck 12 framework provides us with our nominal distribution and access scale. So we maintain these data in our GIS BioGeo databases at the Huck 12 level. Each of the data sets are Huck 12. Approximately 88 million acres of ground that we cover with our database. Not all of it's in agriculture, obviously, but still a very extensive database covering Iowa, Illinois, and essentially the Minnesota River Basin in southern Minnesota. The components to the database in general, of course, the oil data we derive from gSSURGO, all the work that Sharon's done with her group to assemble that, and the information that's found in the soil data mart. Land use information, we use the NAT cropland data layer to extract information for this area. Right now we have 6 years of data in place, 2007 through 2012. We'll be adding 2013 in this spring. One of the things that was really instrumental in allowing us to move to this scale was the advent of LiDAR-derived elevation models. These high-resolution elevation models provide us with the opportunity to do terrain analysis and essentially track water flows across the landscape, which is, of course, instrumental for conservation planning. The detailed framework that we use has been derived from the pre-2008 Farm Bill CLU field database. We took that old database, stripped out all the attribution that was there, and then this is where the students came in. They actually edited it to be a crop-specific database for 2009. We chose 2009 because in our initial efforts, it was the middle year of our land use data. It also, 2008 was wet, 2010 was wet, so 2009 seemed to be a good place to start. And that's the data development that took really a lot of time and effort by ourselves and the students as well. So I'm going to go over these 3 components for the data themes and kind of give you a flavor for that, and then I'll turn it back over to Mark and Sarah for the kind of framework and planning tool stuff. Soil data, I'm talking to the NRCS. You all know your soil data probably better than I do. This is just an example of a Huck 12's worth of soils data. Again, the 10-meter gSSURGO rafters are what we use. It's really
excellent data set for modeling and for doing GIS processing in our tool development. This is just an example from one Huck 12 up on the Des Moines lobe. I hope that you can see the watershed boundary. That's the Huck 12 watershed boundary that comes out of the National Watershed Boundary Database that's published by USGS. We extend the reach of our soil data for each of the Huck 12s beyond that boundary because we realize that now with high resolution terrain modeling, we'll probably see changes in that watershed boundary, and we expect that especially in the low resolution, or excuse me, the low relief areas, especially in central Iowa, some parts of Illinois, that we'll probably see some fairly significant changes in that watershed boundary. In any event, we use the gSSURGO. You can see those tables there. Those are the ones that we draw our attribution from. There's a selected set of attribution. We couldn't include the entire soil data mark collection, but we do have hooks to that. So for our soils attribution, we carry 27 fields that come directly out of the soils data mart database. And again, you can see those up there. You probably won't be able to see them in too much detail, but we selected these attributes because we felt that they provide us a real solid foundation for soils information to help us in our modeling. We also included elements from the Value 1 table that was published along with the gSSURGO, and we were finding that to be quite a useful data set. So we have these elements that are in the data structure at present. Excuse me. We also have the hooks, MU key, the CO key, and the CH key that are carried here so that if someone wanted to bring along additional soil data from the soils data mart database, they could do so quite easily. Again, the land use data is derived from the NAS cropland data layer. Presently, the 2007 to 2012 are what we have in our database. There are some issues with using the data. You know, if you go back at the early part of this 6-year period, it was based primarily on the Indian satellite that was made available, and that had 56-meter resolution. In later years, they moved that to a 30-meter resolution by combining it back with the TM5 satellite information that was less than, well, it was injured, I guess you'd say. We're looking forward to the 2013 Landsat 8 data. In speaking with the NAS guys, they think that it's really going to be a helpful product for their follow-on work. So we expect that in years to come, we'll be able to see those data be used along with other sensors to do even a better job of identifying the different crop types that are available out there. In the map part on the left-hand side, you can see the individual fields that have been populated with our land use data. If you look at the two kind of pink boxes here, let me see if I can figure this thing out now. This is all one record, or record set, I should say, just broken up in half so we can kind of understand what's going on. But just one down here at the bottom, and for each field, we carry the dominant crop type. So in this case, in 2007, it's a 5, that's soybean. And then corn, then soybeans, and so forth. So we, in each field, the dominant crop type and the percentage that crop makes up that field. So as you look across this one record here, 94%, 93%, 92%, it's obviously a corn, soybeans mix. You can look at the other ones that we have here as well, and you can see that we have varying percentages across the period of record. And we use that information to derive a crop rotation string, and that's what we have here. And so if you look at this one for the first record, BC, BC, BC. That's a very strict corn beans rotation. Every year, it's alternating back and forth. And as part of the work that Sarah and I worked up, we came up with a rule-based system to evaluate this record and come up with what we call our general land use, which is essentially a crop history for the period of record for each individual field. You can look at the legend up here and see the different classifications that we have, and you can see here the crop rotation string and how we might use that to derive those general land use classes. We also carry some supplemental information. We count the number of pairs of continuous corn, which helps us understand what's going on. And we also look at just how dominant the dominant crop is in terms of whether it's over 75%, or if it's less than 75%, we call that a mixed field. We can't say for certain that that's absolutely that dominant crop, and there may be some other components there. Again, these are going to go into helping us assign our general land use classes. So these are the general land use classes. The first two, the corn, soybeans, and continuous corn, very strict. They essentially have to be a strict 2-year rotation for corn, soybeans. Continuous corn have to have 6 years of continuous corn. The CS with continuous corn is kind of a catch-all for those that are in between with some continuous corn. We felt that it was a good idea to kind of try and segregate those out so that we can address them independently. The pasture is an interesting class because the remote sensing technology has got a little challenge in trying to identify different crop classes. We had to kind of aggregate the responses from NAS crop data layer to essentially a single pasture grass hay class. They have a hard time identifying them discretely, and they've changed over the years in their attempts to do so. The one thing I did note is that they have recently revamped their entire data structure, going back, to the original 1999 data, I believe, to collapse a lot of these into a single general pasture grass hay class. We have two different rotations that we tried to extract that offer some interesting kinds of land use classes. Conservation rotation is a corn soybeans rotation with some pasture grass hay in it. So it could likely be a corn, beans, and alfalfa rotation. The extended rotation is, again, could be corn, soybeans, but instead of pasture, it's got some other annual crop. Could be a row crop, could be a small grain crop. Mixed agriculture is kind of a catch-all for those that don't fit into the above classes very nicely, and it helps us kind of note that we have agriculture and gives an opportunity to kind of keep track of what's going on. Again, we always carry the actual dominant class for each field, so we can always go back and examine what that particular other crop might be in. I should mention that for each Huck 12, we also keep the original raster for each of the in the period of record. So we have raster for the 2007 through 2012 NAS crop layer in its original form. The last class that I want to mention here is one that we kind of picked up later on called flood-prone cropland. And essentially what we were finding is that there were some fields that had a dominant class of water 1 or more years out of the period of record. So we decided to assign those a unique identifier and try and get a better feel for those fields that might be undergoing agricultural production but subject to flooding. So if we look across the three states, could you please mute your phone, or please? We can see some interesting patterns arising. These are the actual individual fields in the data structure. In this case, it's over a million agricultural fields, over 66 million acres of agricultural land. And you start to see, again, some interesting kind of patterns here. You're going to start to kind of really redefine the corn belt here. We can see where the yellows and oranges start to kind of dominate. And what's interesting is we down here in southern Illinois, up here in central Minnesota, we start to see some of these extended and mixed rotations taking hold. And of course, with the driftless area of Illinois, or Iowa and Minnesota, and then the southern Iowa plains, those more highly dissected, we see the pasture land kind of dominating. Of those 66 million acres of agricultural land, right around 75% are in corn or soybeans. So it is truly the corn belt. Notably, about a little over 1% of the agricultural land is these flood-prone cropland acres, 850,000 acres of land. Interestingly, we were able to take this data and kind of look at it a little differently and look at how just the gross land use has changed over time, over the period of record. Up here at the top, the orange is corn, the brown is pasture grass hay, and green is soybeans. And so what we're seeing, of course, is that little thin line back here is forest. That remains fairly constant, as does the water, and then some of the lower classes in terms of their percentage of contribution. But, starting back in 2009 or so, we started to see an increase in corn, pretty much to the detriment of pasture grass hay class. So it's very interesting to kind of use these data to kind of examine how land uses have changed over time. I mentioned before the use of high-resolution LiDAR-derived elevation models that we have now available to us. We're very fortunate here in Iowa that back in 2006 we began a statewide data collection effort to acquire LiDAR data and derive elevation models from them. We are currently using a 3-meter horizontal resolution data structure. It's available statewide. Minnesota has very similar data, as does Indiana. Illinois, not so much. We found that in order to make it very useful for our conservation planning work, that we had to hydrologically enforce the elevation models. And essentially what that means is that we had to do a fairly significant amount of work to identify impediments to flow and then resolve that. I need to shout out to Brian Gelder from Iowa State University, Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department, who developed very impressive programs that have been able to, under software control, perform pretty much all of the enforcement work that we need to have happen. So over on the left here we see, again, our hunt gate extended beyond the watershed boundary. And as we zoom in, we can see over here on the right, we have this field. This is a single field, 100 meters, maybe 600 meters across, so on and so forth. Up here, we can actually see the different slope classes that might traverse the field, give us opportunity to do different kinds of or understand different kinds of functions and processes. And then as we start to look at moving the water across the landscape, we can examine where concentrated flow of water might occur that would enable us to understand how we might want to address those issues with our conservation planning tools. So these are the main data sets that we've assembled so far. In summary, we can say that we wanted to derive or build an extensive high-resolution data set that's directed towards conservation planning. Right now, our initial themes are gSSURGO soil data, the NAS crop data layer for land use, and the high-resolution LiDAR-derived terrain data. These data combined, along with the field boundaries framework, allow us now to investigate at a field scale and do analyses and provide evaluation opportunities for individual fields, or at least a grouping of fields across a small watershed. And so the intent here then was to develop this data set that's consistent in its structure that would allow us then to take the conservation planning framework and apply it across all of these watersheds. I mean, we're not going to do all of them ourselves, but we're hoping that people will find it data of use and will embrace our conservation planning framework and actually extend that to include more tools and more data as time goes on. I'd like to, before I turn it back to Mark, I'd like to say that, right now we're in discussions with Iowa State University as a possible host for the conservation planning database, and we hope to make it available in the not too distant future. One thing I can say that I'm proud of is that the metadata is complete for all the data, so, which is really something. So in any event, I'm going to pass it back to Mark now. He's going to talk more about the framework and so on and so forth.
All right, thanks, Dave. A great description of the effort that's gone into developing these databases. So with this data available, I mean, here's a question that we've seen out there before, and we've probably been talking about this question in one form or another for 15 or 20 years now. What's the best approach to select and voluntarily place conservation practices in a watershed to achieve nutrient reduction goals and sustain agricultural production? So we're looking to, keep the food supply that we need, but also be able to clean up some issues like Gulf of Mexico epoxy and that sort of thing. And so, can we use data structures like this to help us move forward? And as we started on this project, we started with a kind of one conservation practice at a time. So kind of using the terrain data to identify places in a watershed where a certain conservation practice might go, and then move on to the next conservation practice. And it kind of looked, at the end of the day, it kind of looked like just a list of practices and ways of citing them in a watershed, and we felt that we kind of needed a unifying concept, and that thought about how would we kind of combine these into a conceptual framework as well as something we can actually take out and apply to individual watersheds. That thought resulted in what we're going to show you here. So really, to move forward with this, we need to consider two basic facts about watershed planning and conservation practices and water quality improvement. And I think, I think everyone in the audience is probably familiar with this first one. Each watershed, there's no two of them that are alike. They're all unique. And the same is true of farm operations. They're all each unique. And so if you're going to develop a watershed scale conservation plan, it needs to be tailored to the landscape and landscapes within that watershed, but it also has to be flexible enough to allow farm-level decisions. And the fact that we've got, terrain data across the watershed, but then also a fairly detailed database on on field boundaries and soils and land uses allows us to give that translation between the watershed and the individual farm. The other piece that's really important in this conceptually, I think, is to consider that whether you're talking about nitrogen, phosphorus, or both nitrogen and phosphorus, and in some cases, all three are in the Erie Basin, there's focus on T, but I really think we're going to need to be thinking about both of these nutrients over the longer term. In either case, if you look at the research out there in conservation practices and their effectiveness for nutrient reduction, and the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, if you look at the review they did of the effectiveness of conservation practices and do an analysis of what those results of that review imply, it basically tells you that a mix of practices, both within fields and below field edges, are going to be needed to meet our nutrient reduction goals. So with that in mind, then, we thought that, to kind of build this into a concept, needing both in-field and below-field practices, is to start thinking about conservation systems at a watershed scale, to begin with soils and the requirement to build soil health as part of your system. And so we've got a set of practices there at the base of this pyramid, protecting soils from erosion, limiting excess nutrients through the 4R practice, nutrient management, and so on. And then, if you can, practices to build soils. Cover crops are one that are getting increasing attention, but there's others out there, living mulches, other types of crop rotations, and so on. If you're able to build your soils, you improve the infiltration rates of the soil, you improve water holding capacity, and essentially that means you've got less water coming off or moving through those soils as runoff or drainage. And if you are keeping more of the water in your soils, you're improving crop productivity, obviously, but you're also could be improving the effectiveness of practices placed down below those fields that can intercept and treat those nutrients, because we know we need those practices because agricultural systems are going to be leaky. It's just a matter of how often they're leaky and how badly they're leaky, and we can use soil management to have that situation just a little bit better in terms of what our nutrient loads are coming off of our fields and runoff and drainage. And then on down the way, so you also have practices to control water within fields, controlled drainage, grass waterways, filter strips, terraces would be examples of those. Below fields would be nutrient removal wetlands, ways of managing variable source areas, the source runoff, and then the capstone then is your riparian management system and your management of the of that river or stream corridor. And so then to kind of build this out, this concept, what we did was to think about individual practices and the pathways that are involved with the conservation practice. Each conservation practice is applied at one of these scales and addresses a certain pathway. And so this is how we kind of built that out. And so you can see the colors, from gray to yellow to green to blue. So take that upside down. Whoops. I'm moving this around too much. Go there you go. There we go. Okay. And then you turn that upside down and fill it out with practices. And so at the top then it begins with those soil improvement practices as a foundation, and then considers that in each of the succeeding scales you have practices placed within fields, below fields, or down in the riparian zone to address tile drainage, a major water pathway in the Midwest, or surface runoff. And this essentially forms a 3x2 matrix here. And so if you look in there, you've got sets of practices that are laid out that address that pathway at that scale. And we've got a little mess up here with the translation, but we'll clarify that as we move along here. So it's actually a 12-step process moving through, and it ends up then with scenario development and application. We're going to take you through an example all the way. But first, over here on the side, okay, I put that down. So here's one of two side matrices here, and this is based on runoff risk assessment. And basically, this is applied to all the fields in a watershed, and it classifies them according to the proximity to the stream and the steepness of slopes. Obviously, if you've got a steep field close to the stream, that's going to be one of your bigger priorities in terms of limiting runoff and opportunities for water quality improvement from runoff in that watershed, and so on. And so again, we'll take you through an example here. The other assessment is down for riparian practices. And really, this is thinking about the fact that our landscape settings throughout a riparian corridor vary up and down and throughout that net stream network. And really, the opportunities for water quality improvement in that network are based on can you intercept shallow groundwater flows, can you intercept runoff, or can you limit stream bank erosion. So we have a classification here based on the width of the shallow water table across the riparian zone and the amount of runoff delivery. And if you've got both, a lot of runoff coming into a shallow water table zone, that's a critical zone. If you've got neither, you may have opportunities there for bank stabilization, but that does not require a very wide riparian buffer. About 20 or 30 feet will do in most cases. So we'll take you through an example here. But first, just to kind of pull it all together, we're looking at a variety of practices that manage tile drainage and water quality, asking where they might be placed in a watershed, practices that manage runoff and the quality of that runoff, and where might they be placed in a watershed, and then think about how contaminants may be getting into the stream through the riparian zone and along the riparian zone, and what are the opportunities for water quality improvement throughout that stream network, and how can we design riparian buffers to match those opportunities, and wrapping all this up into a single package. At the same time, we're also thinking about new and novel practices. And here's one example that we're looking at in our lab. With some work that Dan James is doing with a fairly big group in the Midwest to look at the saturated buffer. So rather than allowing tile drainage water to go right through the riparian buffer, can you actually put in a drop box and distribute that tile water around the top of the riparian zone? What slope configuration do you need to be able to identify places where this sort of practice might go in? And we've got some ideas about that as well. So we're going to look at an example watershed here. This is in the Driftless area, southeast Minnesota. It's the Middle Whitewater River. It's a 34,000-acre watershed. And you can see some of the input through the input data that we've developed from that planning database, including LIDAR, land use, and the soils information. Okay, another important piece of the input data is to accurately identify the stream channels. And so the way we do this is to use an automatic stream definition algorithm called Fuker-Douglas, and then edit the result of that through careful examination of aerial photos. One of the things we want to be sure to do is if we bring these tools into a watershed, we don't want to recommend riparian practices in a place where there's no stream, and that's fairly easy to do if you're relying on automated methods to delineate your stream network. So this is an important step in setting up the whole process, the application of this process to a given watershed. Okay, So the next piece then, we need to delineate tile drainage and surface runoff. And this is in a karst watershed, and so it's a very permeable bedrock. It looks like there are some areas up in the upper part of this watershed where we may have some tile drainage, and indeed the state of Minnesota has mapped a few tile outlets in this part of the watershed, so we have a limited amount of tile drainage in this watershed. One of the things that we've developed also is to be able to look at surface depressions. That's really important in glacial land.
What are you doing, man?
It's also important in karst terrain because we've got sinkholes and such. River runoff straight into the cave system.
I think that's bullying. That's bullying. You're being mean.
Hello? Someone needs to mute their phone because I'm not hearing.
You're being mean.
Please, if the audience,
I don't know who's on.
audience, if you'd please mute your phone.
Aaron, he's
Somebody's
cutting
talking,
off,
meeting with our speaker.
ordinance.
Okay, so there's not a whole lot of karst or sinkholes in this watershed. About 3% of the surface area flows into a sinkhole in this particular watershed. The runoff risk assessment looks at proximity to the stream and slope. So these darker fields are those that have a higher sediment delivery ratio, and this is we've applied the Minnesota's sediment delivery ratio. It's a log linear relationship to predict sediment delivery ratio based on distance from stream. And then looking at the distribution of slopes in this watershed, this is based on the upper quartile, the steepest 25% of each field, and then that ends up showing a lot of the steeper lands down in the lower part of the watershed. So you do a cross-classification there, and these darker fields then show you the steepest fields with the highest sediment delivery ratio, and then so on out to here. Some of these yellow fields would either be steep or close to the stream. One of the practices you might consider in a situation like that would be grass waterways, and here's a possible distribution of grass waterways in those fields. Nutrient removal wetlands, we don't have a lot of tile drainage in this watershed, but it does look like we've got some high water table conditions and some tile drainage up in this part of the watershed, and we could cite about a dozen possible locations for wetlands in here, and the potential exists that a couple of these could be feasible based on what we know about this area. Another type of practice that is based on low impoundments, and really one of the things you're doing here with wetlands is to site an impoundment to give you a pool of water that does not back water up into the tile drainage systems in the contributing area. So that's one of the set of criteria that we apply to propose these locations. Another type of impoundment that's used in conservation practice is the water and sediment control basin. And this is going to be a little bit higher impoundment to give settling time for sediment moving through that system. And you want a fairly small pooled area there. And then finally, one of the things that we're seeing out there is, there's some research been done through Iowa State University here to look at perennial filter strips and their potential to reduce nutrient loads to streams. And one of the results from that is that if you are able to put in a filter strip at the foot slope position of a slope, that you can get very high nutrient removal efficiencies, either for phosphorus to runoff, but also the subsurface flows. You can get some nitrate reduction in those, because in these foot slope positions, the slope is decreasing, and some of these subsurface flows come closer to the surface and can interact with that organic matter there. And so you might get some denitrification in some of those zones. And so this practice in a perennial filter strip in a foot slope location could help with both phosphorus and nitrate reduction. And so here's a distribution foot slope positions where you could apply that filter strip to get those sort of reductions, and it might be an appropriate practice in a number of these fields in this watershed. And then finally, you have to look at some of the unique characteristics of each watershed in applying an overall framework like this. And being in karst terrain, there are a lot of springs in this watershed. There are about 36, and a lot of the smaller ones are up in the upper part of this watershed. And we noticed that there is a little bit of data suggesting that the higher nitrate concentrations in these springs occur in the upper part of the watershed. And we also noticed that there are soils around in these areas that are high in carbon. And so there's the opportunity here perhaps to put in some structures to use that naturally occurring soil organic matter as a bioreactor for nitrate reduction. So to consider some of these natural features is an important piece of applying this framework to an individual watershed. Okay, I'm going to pass this over now to Sarah Porter, and Sarah's done a great job with the riparian management system and buffer design piece that we put together on this, and she's going to discuss that.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So I'm going to talk about our riparian analysis, which is the second matrix in our planning framework. And what you see on this slide is one of the major inputs to that analysis, and it's an estimated depth to the water table. And one of the reasons that we're interested in this is that we want to take a look at that interaction that you might have between the root zone and the groundwater next to the stream. For example, if you have a really wide zone of shallow groundwater next to the stream, that might be a place where you have a lot of opportunity for nutrient removal and denitrification. So this is a raster layer, and it's essentially a representation of the surface elevation relative to the channel elevation. So how we derive this is to subtract the elevation of each grid cell in the DEM by the elevation of the channel grid cell that it will eventually flow into. And what we get out is an estimate of the depth to the water table, which we then reclassify into categories such as less than 1.5 meters, which is what we call the shallow water table zone, and 1.5 to 3 meters, 3 to 5, and so on. So now I'm going to walk you through the actual steps of the analysis, and this is showing a different watershed that's in north central Illinois, but it provides a good illustration of the process. So what our analysis does is essentially it gives us a way to discretize the riparian zone on each side of the channel and then classify those zones according to the function that they may best provide. So similar to the runoff risk assessment, what we do is to look at two variables within the riparian zone. One is how much interaction with the water table does that zone have, and two, how much runoff is delivered to the stream through that riparian zone. So I'm going to walk you through the process, and what we start with, and what is shown here, is the channel network in blue and the flow pathways or the runoff pathways in black. And these runoff pathways show how we derive that runoff variable that goes into the analysis. So next, we add the shallow water table zone. So this is the area in purple where the water table is within 1.5 meters of the surface. And what we're looking at here is how wide that shallow water table zone is. So now we have both variables in our matrix, that being the amount of runoff delivered to the stream and the width of that shallow water table zone. And you can already see that it varies quite a bit as you move along the stream channel. And then next, we discretize the channel. So what we've done here is use the tool in NRCS that creates polygons along a line, which in this case, that line is the channel network. And then we create 250-meter long, 180-meter wide polygons along that channel. And we chose this 250-meter length as what we consider to be a logical length for management planning in the riparian zone.
Could we be heard?
I don't know.
It's a lot of static.
Right now?
It's a lot of static
It
that
sure is.
do come through.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just keep going. So what we do next is we use the channel itself to split those polygons in two. So now we have a polygon in each side of the stream that's 250 meters long and on average 90 meters wide. So, and then finally, we look at those two variables within each polygon, and we do a cross classification to determine the function that that zone may best provide. So you can see in this example that where you have a lot of the blue color, that corresponds to areas where you have a wide zone of shallow water table, but you don't have a lot of runoff. And these might be good opportunities to have plant deep-rooted vegetation that may provide increased nutrient uptake. Likewise, where you have a lot of runoff coming in a narrow zone of shallow water table, your main concern is probably surface runoff, and this is where you might plant stiff-stem grasses. And these polygons are shown in the yellow color. And where you don't have much runoff coming in, nor do you have a wide zone of shallow water table, your main concern is probably stream bank stabilization. And these polygons are shown in the green color. So again, what we're trying to do here is use the natural opportunities provided in the landscape, whether that's the shape of the stream bank, the amount of runoff coming in, or soil characteristics, to match conservation opportunities in those places where they will be the most efficient. So this slide then is just showing the result of that riparian analysis in the whitewater watershed. You can see that a lot of the polygons are mapped to that stream bank stabilization function. Those are shown in green. But as you move to the upper reaches of the watershed, there's flatter slope and more opportunity exists to influence that shallow groundwater. Especially in that southernmost stream reach, you see a lot of orange and blue polygons, and that corresponds to areas where you have those wide zones of shallow water table.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So, yeah, she's done a great job with this and being able to separate, each side of the stream bank is really critical here. And here's a watershed where you've got about 107 kilometers of stream, which means you've got 214 kilometers of stream bank, twice that much. And so being able to understand what your opportunities are for water quality improvement throughout that system are really important. So so that kind of brings us to the end of the individual tools. So if we were to take this out then and use this information in this watershed, this would be picked up by the local conservation planner there. And how would he apply this? And one of the things that we're doing is to kind of cherry pick some of these different practices that seem most appropriate for the watershed and put them together into conservation planning scenarios that just as a starting point for discussion. So here's one that is based on looking at the springs, especially those in the upper part of the watershed where there might be opportunities to denitrify those in the soils that are high in carbon in those areas, and then also some sort of form of runoff control in these fields that have a high potential to deliver runoff directly to the stream. And then depressions are also may be important in this watershed as well. Again, this is up to the local folks who are working with the producers in this watershed to help them understand the opportunities that this framework might identify. Here's another sort of conservation planning scenario, again, looking at the distribution of those springs, a few wetlands and water sediment control basins. You can see the sediment control basins could settle sediment out of runoff from over half the watershed there, and then foot slope plantings in those fields that are very close to the stream. So to kind of bring it to a conclusion here, just the key points to this framework, we address tile drainage and runoff pathways and stress the importance of soil health for conservation success. We suggest possible beneficial locations for different types of practices placed in fields at field edges and in riparian zones through this framework. And we include well-known practices, but can also include some new types of practices as long as we can develop siting criteria that can be applied to the input data. So we're developing here a planning resource, not a plan. It's basically a database of conservation opportunities in the watershed. And this is something that we hope we could apply to individual watersheds, hand over to the local conservation planners. And of course, actual conservation planning is inherently a locally led process. We've got a tradition of this in this country with our conservation districts to put this process in the hands of landowners and local planners, and we hope that at least in places that a framework like this will help reinvigorate those structures that we have in place for local planning. So we've just kind of flushed this out in a paper there. You can see it at the bottom. And we want to, and it's available online, whether or not you're a subscriber to this journal, the Journal of Soil Water Conservation. The work was supported by a Conservation Innovation Grant obtained through the Environmental Defense Fund. And one of the things, working with a NGO is, they can bring some different resources into this, and they certainly want to see some progress in the area of water quality improvement. So one of the things they did in this project was to scour around the Midwest for specific watersheds where the local capacity to take up a technology like this is high. And one of the watersheds that we've worked in to apply this framework is Indiana. And I'd like to introduce Shannon Detzler, the State Resource Conservationist there in Indiana, and I'll make a few comments on his observations of this framework there in Indiana. So, Shannon, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me? Sounds good.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, this is Shannon Zugula, the State Resource Conservationist here in Indiana, and just to reiterate what Mark just presented, that when I first saw this approach, it really rung home close to me, and it was something that I had been waiting for as a conservationist for a long time. First and foremost, as we think of any water quality project or targeted approach, we've gotten better by at least getting down to a 12-digit HUC level, but we still have that same mentality of, here's our shopping list, let's find farmers who come into our office and try to find what they're willing to do. The reason I really like this approach is that it is a systematic approach that, first and foremost, has a foundation on conservation cropping systems that improve soil health. I'm a true believer, especially, that until we get our rainfall to infiltrate into that soil and to be held by that soil, and that soil, just as Mark said, to be actively building that soil and that organic matter and that soil biology to hold that water, cycle those nutrients. We're just spending money and we're not getting benefits. So until we get watersheds, a large portion of that watershed into a healthy soil system, the conservation practices are not going to function perfectly, or at least not as effectively as they could. And from there, you show that basis of soil health, and that you start to fine-tune where these more expensive practices or maybe harder to sell practices might sit within the watershed. And this gives us a systematic approach, again, to target landowners, not just target watersheds, but now target landowners, and that helps us target outreach and education. Because, as we know, to get the right farmer to adopt some of these practices takes a long time. So at least now we can start tailoring specific practices potentially to specific farmers. And or at a minimum, and we are out there providing conservation planning assistance that gives our planners an awareness of, yeah, I'm out on this farm, there's a potential for a constructed wetland or a two-stage ditch or drainage water management. And just another reminder that now we start planting those seeds with the farmers, and we might start seeing some good things come of it. So, again, I think this is groundbreaking on how we should start doing conservation planning, and especially watershed planning. And the other thing I was excited about this is, to my knowledge, this is one of the first, if not the first, peer-reviewed journal articles that outwardly recognizes conservation cropping systems that improve soil health as a key solution to water quality problems on ag land. So, with that, I'm very pleased to be working with Mark and his science team. We're actually working in 2 watersheds here in Indiana. We're proposing 2. We're just starting. So I'm really looking forward to something for something. So,
folks over there on this project. So it looks like we've got a question, and no questions have been answered yet. Has any been asked?
So yes, there is one online question, and I'd invite people to put their question in writing, or we can take the phone off mute and ask questions live as well. But the question online is, how is this related to the SEEP modeling effort?
Any relationship between this and the SEEP modeling effort would be fairly indirect. This is a HUC 12 framework, and the SEEP modeling effort using Apex and SWAT was a nationwide effort. I'm pretty sure that they looked at HUC 8 in that process, and so the linkage would be indirect. We could look perhaps at the results for individual HUC 8s and the results that they might indicate for specific types of practices if we want to kind of classify the best opportunities at the HUC 8 scale and zero that down to the HUC 12. I don't know about that. We haven't actually thought about that in much detail. But for right now, this is an effort for Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, and Indiana, and we will move forward with folks who are interested as we can. The riparian grid length is 250 meters. What was? Do I have to click on that?
What was the width? How did the decision get made?
Basically what we're doing there is we're looking at the grid cells along the bank itself and identifying mean widths along that 250 meters and mean contributing areas within that 250 meters at that group of bank cells along that 250 meter assessment polygon. And so the box there is kind of just to help visualize the opportunities throughout there. There's nothing formal about that. Buffer widths themselves prescribed or suggested by the framework vary from about 6 meters out to about 80 or so. For critical zones, we can run around within a wide shallow water table. So the 250 meters was just arrived at as a length that would be appropriate for individual management. There was nothing, specific other than that. We wanted to take something that would characterize the variability along the stream length, but then also have it be a length that you can manage separately in some situations. Okay, the next question. Does the tool provide a quantitative estimate for nutrient reduction? No, it doesn't. At this point, we are working on that. We're in discussion with some modelers about how we might go about, applying the results of this framework to assess different conservation planning scenarios. A lot of the models that are out there, like SWAT, they're not actually spatially distributed the way that our framework kind of parses things out to the field scale. We are coming up with a spreadsheet type approach to identify whether a particular scenario would have a poor, good, or in-between chance of meeting a certain nutrient reduction, just based on the distribution of practices and how many fields are being treated by certain by the practices that are part of the scenario.
All right, I've got a question from here at the center. Are there any plans to modify runoff according to land cover and soil type?
Well, we have not done that specifically in here. I think that's part of the adaptation of this to the individual watershed. And certainly, there's in this whitewater watershed that we've just discussed here, a lot of those fields that we showed as being highlighted for conservation concern do have conservation practices on them. Contour strip farming is common in this watershed in a number of those fields, and so this is just another view of that risk from more of a watershed perspective than a farm scale perspective, and something that the planners should be able to pick up on. But there are opportunities perhaps to weight the runoff by water holding capacity or crop rotation, but we haven't gone to that point yet.
I think that one of the things that's important to realize is that we're basically just beginning. We'd like to see this the database and the framework and the toolkit become available to interested parties, so that we can see not only the tools get extended, new tools, different tools get developed, but additional data structures that might be of interest as well.
Another question here at the center is, and this is something Sarah was covering, I'm calculating the shallow water tables within 1.5 meters. And the question is, do those match up with the soil SURGO data? And I guess why calculate that if it's part of the SURGO data?
We haven't had a chance to look at that. I think that's a very interesting question. Who developed those Kathleen, right?
Kathy Boomer from the Nature Conservancy developed that tool. And we haven't looked at the exact fields in the SURGO database that would correspond to the different depths of the water table, so I can't.
Yeah, one of the things we see, I'll add one comment on that. When you look at the soil survey information, in a lot of the Midwest, in a lot of these alluvial valleys, the soils along that floodplain area are mapped out as a complex, and so unless there's some clear delineation with terraces or something like that, there may not be a lot of detailed layout of where high water tables might occur, and I think we would probably find we would do a better job than some of the complex map units that we see in the floodplain zones and in the watersheds we looked at.
So maybe it reduces the noise.
It'd be a good thing to follow up on, though. There's a lot of opportunities for research in here, and we're just kind of trying to make a list.
Any other questions from online, the audience there? And there's one more in the submitted online. Conservation planning by watershed was the way things were done in some states 25 years ago. Unfortunately, this was abandoned for various reasons. Is NRCS planning to go back to something that should never have been abandoned?
I don't work for NRCS, so I don't know that. But I think one of the things that we hope might come out of this is the question is something like this enable NRCS to rejuvenate those efforts, and how can this be modified and adapted and added onto perhaps with modeling tools to bring those watershed planning efforts to be more effective.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that 25 years ago we never had the data that we have now that would enable these kinds of detailed investigations. And now, hopefully with USGS pursuing the national 3-depth project to derive high-resolution terrain data for the entire nation, we might be able to see that the extensiveness of that data collection be pervasive and enable a lot more work of this type just about everywhere.
All right, well, I just want to thank our speakers today from Ames, and just let people know that, you know, they work at the National Laboratory for Agriculture and the Environment, and that was previously known to many of us as the National Soil Test Lab. So it's a name change there. But I do want to thank our speakers, and appreciate you sticking through the audio challenges there. And this concludes our webinar.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.